Welcome to another video by your friend Matthew. So, number one, you can see my dog, my best friend. Number two, I've been doing a lot of research, reading, writing, reflecting, as always. And where lately have my research and reflections led me? Well, they have led me to Mr. Tom Campbell, a physicist and consciousness researcher who has had some very unique experiences with his own consciousness and with accessing, I guess, what he would call the database, the larger consciousness system that is behind it all in his theory. So, Tom Campbell, he's got a trilogy called My Big Toe. Toe standing for Theory of Everything. Now, to be completely transparent with you, I haven't read that trilogy. I plan to soon. I just discovered him very recently. But I've already devoured hours of his content on YouTube. He's got thousands of hours on YouTube. And, you know, God bless YouTube for that. And for having such a plethora of exciting content, you know? So let's just jump right in. Tom Campbell's Big Toe, Big Theory of Everything. The two assumptions that Tom Campbell claims that he has and that his big theory has is that consciousness exists and evolution exists. I like it. He criticizes materialism, materialist science, materialistic reductionism, science or theories that reduce all of reality, including consciousness, to material processes. Still in mainstream science, the conventional view is that consciousness is an epiphenomenon that is created by matter, by our brains. And our brains were created by, 12 billion years of evolution in the universe. Stuff like that, right? Well, Tom Campbell, like many spiritual philosophies, as well as other scientists who are open to challenging the accepted paradigm, like Rupert Sheldrake, Peter Russell, David Bohm, who were willing to kind of challenge the materialist paradigm and challenge the notion that consciousness is an epiphenomenon. And so there are some scientists and a lot of, spiritual thinkers throughout all of documented history who have seen consciousness as more of a fundamental thing, if not the most fundamental thing in the universe. Now, that's, that even though I seem to resonate with and gravitate to that view of consciousness, it's still hard for me to really get my bearings with that and really make sense of, well, how is consciousness the most fundamental thing in the universe? I mean, obviously, when we think of consciousness, we think about human consciousness, usually. And to think about something akin to human consciousness as being the fundamental reality of the universe is it's very intriguing, very interesting, but hard to really make sense of when we think about history. Nevertheless, Tom Campbell, he places consciousness as the most fundamental reality. And so he's got all these special terms, he's got terms for all of his theories. So, number one, he says there is a larger consciousness system that operates similar to a computer. And this larger consciousness system, it divided itself, or partition. He uses the word partition. The larger consciousness system partitioned itself into individuated units of consciousness. Very similar to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. Very similar, similar to a lot of ancient, Hindu ideas in the Upanishads and the Vedas, and in the Bhagavad Gita, about consciousness or Brahman, or infinity, kind of breaking itself into these finite forms, right? So it's very aligned with a lot of those ideas. So Tom Campbell says that the larger consciousness system partitions itself into tons and tons of individuated units of consciousness. And these individuated units of consciousness, if we continue with the computer metaphor, which, he uses that type of language, computer, simulation, that sort of thing. He says that we live in a virtual reality. We live in a simulated reality that is not... we live in a simulated reality that is not deterministic. It's not all predetermined. It's probabilistic, and it that's where he brings in a lot of quantum theory. He says we live in a probabilistic universe, and so we even have a probable past and a probable future, he says, meaning all of the decisions that we could have made in the past, all of the actions that we could have taken in the past are stored in the database as well. So, I guess you could say, I'm pretty sure that he would equate the database, the big, massive database, as the larger consciousness system. So the larger consciousness system is the database that stores every single thing that has ever happened. And, he does make a point to say that things that aren't super relevant to a significant change in anything or evolution, those things might not get stored because it's inefficient to store things that don't have a big impact, So he says that the larger consciousness system partitioned itself into individuated units of consciousness, and those individuated units of consciousness end up logging in or selecting avatars to live in this virtual reality for the purpose of evolution and the evolution of consciousness, right? So that probably sounds a little complicated. Let me just take a moment with that. So he says, he defines consciousness as an information system as well as the ability to choose. So he's big on free will. He thinks that consciousness and free will are completely paired and they can't be without each other, and you can't have free will without consciousness, and you can't have consciousness without free will, he says. Free will is a big topic that I've thought about a lot, and it's hard to really come up with a conclusive stance on it, but that's beside the point. I'll talk about that some other time. He's big on free will. He thinks free will is crucial, fundamental. And so the way he thinks about free will is that since we live in a probabilistic reality, any decision that I could make in any given moment, I have kind of a range of possible things that I could do at any given moment. And so free will would be just the freedom to choose from those possibilities, from the options that I have. And so he says that the more that we expand our consciousness or improve the quality of our consciousness, that's the phrasing he uses. He says the quality of consciousness. As we improve the quality of our consciousness, our decision space, he says, our decision space gets bigger and bigger. So, for example, if the more reference points we have, the more we travel, literally or figuratively, the more knowledge we gain, the more different viewpoints we consider, the more that we've seen, the more that we've considered, our decision space and our consciousness gets bigger and bigger because our sense of possibilities gets bigger and bigger. I love that, and so basically if there is a point or a goal or a reason for the larger consciousness system to partition itself into individuated units of consciousness, is so that each individuated unit in his mind, it's more efficient to break consciousness down into these individuated units of consciousness, because each individuated unit of consciousness who ends up living as this avatar like me, he would say that I, in a body as an avatar, Matthew Sherling, is just an avatar that the individuated unit of consciousness that is operating through me is living through me as an avatar in order to learn and grow and be challenged and make decisions and improve the quality of consciousness of my individuated unit of consciousness. And the more each individuated unit of consciousness evolves and improves its quality, then the more that the larger consciousness system as a whole evolves and improves its consciousness. So he thinks of the larger consciousness system as an evolving system as well. It's not static, and it's growing and evolving. So that's really interesting, And he's got some, with all of that as groundwork, he's got some very intriguing ideas about, afterlife, basically. And I'm not going to dive into that right now. There's a lot there. Maybe I'll make another video about that. But this one, I just wanted to give a breakdown of the main skeleton of his big theory of everything. So we got the larger consciousness system breaks itself down into individuated units of consciousness, which become any conscious being in this virtual reality or any other virtual realities, life on this planet or any other dimensions or planets that also have beings like us, conscious beings. And again, he says that consciousness, to really be a conscious being, you have to have the ability to make choices. So he says that, rocks and trees are probably aware in some ways, but he says that they don't make choices. Now, that's a big claim, but I see what he means. But beings like us, we do make choices, and so we are truly conscious. So the larger consciousness system breaks itself into individuated units of consciousness as an effective method for improving consciousness and evolving consciousness. He talks about love a lot, actually. He's got all this kind of scientific. He's science-minded, but he's also had these really bizarre experiences, subjective experiences with consciousness. So he's a pretty unique. He's got a unique hybridity to him. But he does talk about love, and he talks about how kind of the way to evolve consciousness and improve the quality of consciousness is love, to become love, or to basically, he's big about removing fear, basically. He says that when we're operating by fear leads to, limited beliefs. Fear leads to our egos. Fear basically closes possibilities, and love opens those possibilities. And he uses the word entropy a lot as well. And, entropy meaning disorder, basically. And he says that evolution, is a process of decreasing entropy. And so to evolve consciousness, we need to decrease the entropy in our consciousness and decrease the disorder. And, for him, that disorder is primarily produced by fear. So when we let go of fear, and when we discover and investigate the specific fears that are kind of controlling our life, then we naturally become love, or start operating from a place of love instead of fear. And he says that love creates lower entropy, and that makes sense. I saw a conversation with him and Bruce Lipton, who's also a really interesting scientist who, has a lot of parallels with spiritual, spiritual worldviews. And Bruce Lipton says that, cells, for example, the way that they receive information from their environment is through their membrane. And so to receive more information from their environment, they have to expand their membrane, basically. And in order to do that, they start joining together. And as a bigger and bigger unit of cells that join together, then their membrane gets bigger, and so they can receive more information from their environment. And so he was basically making the point that all of evolution and all living things, in order for living things to evolve, and if we look back in time, the reason that living things evolved the way that they have and continue to do so is by basically when the living things join together. And by joining together, it allows for an expansion of information receptivity or something, and information processing. And so, you could link that to Tom Campbell's idea about love, because the more that we as human beings, and among other living beings like animals and plants and stuff, the more we work together, instead of in our fear just continuing to divide ourselves and staying separate and fighting each other, literally or figuratively, the less that we do that, and the more that we join together through giving and compassion and generosity and looking out for each other and connecting with each other, all of those things, that helps each individuated unit evolve, and it helps the whole evolve. And so it makes sense that love is the vehicle for that. So those are some of the main ideas of his big toe. Other than that, he does talk a lot about like constraints. Like, we live in this virtual reality that has very specific rule sets and constraints. And because of those constraints, that's something else that it serves. Those rule sets and those constraints serve as tools for further evolution, because they make things are at stake. Decisions have gravity, decisions have weight, actions have significant consequences because of the constraints and the rule sets and stuff. And so we live in this virtual reality that has those constraints and those rule sets. One reason that the constraints and rule sets are so specific is to further evolution. And yeah, so I mean, I've just gone down the rabbit hole with Tom Campbell. He's got tons of videos, as I said. He's even got a whole long playlist on his YouTube channel that is from, I guess, this like 3 or 4 day workshop where he was basically trying to teach people how to access the database, because for him, everything is in a database. Everything from the past is in a database, and all other virtual realities are in that database. And so he claims that he can, on command, go into the database to access specific information and specific other virtual realities and things like that. That's where his stuff gets pretty far out, but I'm with it, totally intrigued. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, go check him out. He's helping me just find certain links, because he's making me think more about evolution again, and so he's helping me tie a few things together for my book, and he's also just offering a very interesting map that I can include among the other maps that I explore in my book. So thanks for watching. Until next time, peace out.